to another episode of Stories from the Weight Room. Today will be part 3 of my series on bodybuilding author Charles Gaines. And today I am going to read chapter 10 out of his first book, Stay Hungry. Santo hardly ever got out of bed in the morning before 10 o'clock. He was awakened every day between 9:30 and 9:45 by his landlady's dishwasher upstairs. And he liked to lie in bed, his hands behind his head, and look down at the 2 blocks of 20th Street that he could see from his window where everything was going full tilt. He kept his bed next to the window even in the winter for that purpose. His apartment was in an old brownstone, one of the oldest in 5 Points. Across the street was a medical arts center, and often the first people Santo saw in the morning were bandaged or on crutches or in wheelchairs. There were only 3 other apartments in the building, 2 on the ground floor and one beside his on the 2nd floor. The people who lived in those were all gone by 9:30, and the building was always quiet, except for the thrum of the dishwasher and the sounds that filtered in off the street. Santo would lie in his bed watching the street and wake his body by tightening it one muscle at a time to see if there was any new soreness anywhere. After a while, he would get up and make a milkshake for breakfast. The milkshakes were Thor's idea. Santo would put 2 glasses of tiger's milk, a banana, 3 raw eggs, honey, protein powder, peanut butter, and wheat germ oil into a mixer and beat it all into a heavy yellow liquid. He drank the stuff slowly and thumbed through a few of the 12 magazines he subscribed to. Then he would wash out the mixer, shave, and make the bed. The bed was old and the frame was made of brass. He had bought it in a junk store for $3. In addition to it, Santo's furniture consisted of a table, 3 straight-back chairs, an old bookshelf that held his pieces of pressed glass, a refrigerator, and a hot plate. But the apartment did not seem particularly bare. There was a nice oval rug on the floor that came with the place, and he had tacked up some posters. There was one of Julie Christie looking emotional, and a color print of Canada geese at dawn setting their wings over a field of corn stubble. The room got plenty of light, and Santo liked everything about it except the wallpaper, which was peeling and stained to the color of old mustard. If it was not raining, he would walk to the YMCA. It was a long walk that took him past office buildings and motels and banks and clothing stores. He had passed all these places maybe 200 times before, but he never got tired of noticing the different ways they dealt with the day. He talked to quite a few people on these walks, and it was usually 11:30 before he trotted up the steps of the Y, waved to the girl at the desk, and pushed through the big glass door and the turnstile into the locker room. The locker room was quiet and smelled strongly of disinfectant at this time of day before the businessmen arrived. Santo would change quickly into a sweatsuit and jock, 3 pairs of socks, and leather jogging shoes. Over the top of the sweatsuit, he pulled an old rubber rain jacket. First, he would run a mile around the track upstairs to loosen up, swinging his arms and breathing deeply. It was hot upstairs, and he broke his sweat quickly and could sprint the last 5 laps cool and relaxed. Just off the track, he did 100 twists and side bends and 100 quick sit-ups. Then he went down to the gym and shot baskets for half an hour, mostly jump shots and layups to keep his sweat. After that, he would skip 10 minutes of rope, up on his toes to stretch out the calf muscles, and beat the speed bag for 15 minutes, raising and lowering his hands as different parts of his shoulders loosened. At 1 o'clock, he usually went down to the handball courts for a game with Cal Cogno, who jogged 1,000 miles a year and was 60 pounds lighter than Santo, and who usually beat him. After the handball, Santo would run another mile around the track, which was clogged by then with runners clicking off their laps on little plastic counters, and then cool off on a bench in the gym where he could watch a volleyball game as he waited for his body to calm to the right heartbeat and temperature, and for the stiffness to start to seep into his lower back. He always took 10 minutes of steam, and then there would be businessmen in the steam room talking about the stock market or management trainee programs or something. Santo loved the sound of those conversations and occasionally joined them whether he knew anything about the subject or not, just to participate in the brass tacks, good-humored sound of them. After the steam, he took a quick cold shower, a massage, and then a long warm shower. He would stand under the second shower for maybe 10 minutes with his whole body feeling new and his skin newly stretched, letting the water pour over his head. This was his favorite moment of the day. His body was loose and relaxed and ready for the heavy work he would put it to that night. As the warm water ran over his head, Joe Santo was his best and happiest self. Nothing bothered him then. Everything came together and looked wonderful on the yellow tiles before being swirled with his salts down the drain. On the way to the studio, he usually stopped at Al's Knife and Fork and had a minute steak with 4 eggs broiled on top of it, and fried okra and sliced tomatoes. For the next 3 weeks, Craig and Mary Tate got together with Santo only a few times. Thor, he told them, had him working his tail off to get up for the Mr. Southeast, bombing for 2 or 3 grueling hours every night and stretching out all morning at the Y. Craig worked out with him on Wednesday and Friday evenings, and when they finished around 9 o'clock, they would walk down to Mayoko's and meet Mary Tate for dinner. Then for an hour or two, they would drink sake and eat egg rolls and pork strips, and Santa would talk with great verve about how various muscles were coming along as though they were children being educated. Santo made it impossible for the 3 of them to stop being friends or even to feel uncomfortable with each other. Ever since the Wednesday night after Mary Tate had moved to the mountain, she and Craig had both gone back to work that day. Mary Tate had called Craig in the afternoon from the studio and said that Joe would like to see him around 6 if he was free. Listening to her say that, Craig felt suddenly, unreasonably terrified that maybe he had been set up, that maybe Mary Tate and Santo were out to get him. Did they want money? He gripped the phone, listening for violence in her breathing. Finally, with a trembling voice, he said, "Okay, by God, he'd be there." By 6 o'clock, his uncertainty about Santo By 6 o'clock, his uncertainty about what Santo wanted with him had congealed, and he was truculent and determined when he walked onto the floor of the studio. He carried his hands loosely at his side. Santo was lying down doing tricep presses with a dumbbell. Craig walked around in front of him so he could watch the big fellow's navel, as he had read pro football players do when trying to anticipate sudden moves. "Well, hey, buddy," said Santo. He dropped the dumbbell. "Okay, you wanted to see me, and now I'm here," Craig said, grimly staring at his middle. "I've got friends in the car. I thought we could take a workout together if you and Mary aren't doing anything, and then maybe grab some Jap food." Santo stood up suddenly and stuck out his big hand. Craig froze. "Look, I want to congratulate you, old buddy. I've never seen her in a better mood than today. She was grinning and singing all over the place." At that, Craig raised his eyes finally from Santo's stomach and found himself looking into the sweetest grin he had ever seen. He felt his own face go slack with surprise and admiration. Since then, whenever the 3 of them were together, Santo had come on like a big brother, teasing them, asking if there was anything they needed. He treated Mary Tate with a tender sort of deference, as someone might treat his best friend's wife. Occasionally at their suppers, Craig would catch Mary Tate staring oddly at Santo, but whatever the expression was, it didn't bother him. Over the last couple of weeks, his concern and jealousy had burned off like fog. It seemed obvious now, however, incomprehensible, that Santo had no designs on swiping Mary Tate back. and she had shown no signs of wanting to be swiped. She was happy on the mountain. She told Craig over and over that she had never been so happy, and neither had he. She had filled his refrigerator with Cokes and hot dogs and lemon pies, his kitchen sink with unwashed dishes. She had littered his room with clothes and dirty towels, and on his desk now stood a huge, tacky water skiing trophy, all nickel and fake marble and scroll. But he didn't seem to care about any of it. He cheerfully used the trophy as a paperweight. Shortly after she moved in, he had taken her back to Ensley to get her car, and now each afternoon when he came home and saw it, a homely green Ford parked in the circle in front of the house, the whole house could have been full of dirty dishes and underclothes and would not have lessened his excitement. She would have been home for an hour by then. He got there and he always found her outside, always with some new shine of joy on her face, swinging in a pecan tree, chasing cows in the pasture or in the garden. Her pleasure in the garden was so touching that he had hired a part-time gardener to replant and tend it for her. He would have gladly bought her a tractor to play with down there had she asked for it, for though he wasn't sure exactly what it was they were doing with each other, though he wasn't exactly sure what it was they were doing with each other, he was sure he wanted it to continue. And just as it was. So far, she had made no demands on him, and Craig avoided thinking about what the relationship might develop into. But once in a while during these weeks, Mary Tate and Santo would be swapping rice or something involved in each other. He couldn't help wondering what it was the two of them had in mind. On the second Wednesday in July, he got to the studio about 5:30, just as Santo was finishing his stomach. Santo had on sandals and a pair of green shorts that said Ensley High School. His t-shirt with the bucking Mustang on the front lay across the sit-up bench. His stomach from the sternum to the top of his shorts was flushed from the exercise, and his abdominal muscles looked like short, thick sections of hose. On the soft drink machine sat Newton, his face wizened as black leather, sullenly watching. Thor was reading in his office. A policeman named Andrews, who came up often at night, was working out with Santo and Craig. And Craig picked them up as they began shoulder work. Santo was bombing now for the contest, which was only 3 weeks away, attacking his body with heavy weights and many repetitions to carve each muscle's outline cleaner and divide each muscle group into separate but connected territories. His workouts for the last 3 weeks had been grave and furious. Craig, using less than half the weight he used, could just keep up. And beer-fat Andrews puffed and strained and shook his head, 1 or 2 exercises behind them both. Santo, Andrews said, someday you're gonna pull a gut up here, and I tell you one damn thing, I'm gonna be here and I'm gonna laugh my ass off. Santo chuckled and went smoothly on with a set of behind-the-neck presses. His deltoid muscles strained under the weight, round and dense as cannonballs at the top of his arms. That's all what Birmingham need, all right, a bunch of fat-ass lazy cops, Newton said with a cackle. You little black turd, I ever catch you on the street, I'll teach you how to talk, Andrews told him. You ain't about to get your white trash hands on none of me, officer. Newton meant that. He and Andrews were not friends, and Andrews had a grim reputation. The first thing Craig had heard about him from Franklin was that Andrews knew how to take out an eye with one finger, like popping an olive out of a bottle. You're getting behind, Andrews, Santos said. He was beginning his first set of seated presses with 80-pound dumbbells. Andrews lay on his back on the sit-up board, sweating and panting. Go on, man, he said. I'm tired of this shit. He looked up as Craig took the 40-pound dumbbells from the rack. What the fuck are you doing down here, Blake? Rich as cream and down here grunting and pumping iron like a poor man. I come down to see you, Andrews. Andrews grunted and sat up. You over the mountain smartass has got a loud mouth. He ain't stunting you, officer, Newton said. in a shrill voice that made everything he said sound like an emergency. He wouldn't speak to you if he saw you on the street. He'd buy you and sell you with the change in his pocket. I had to cut your balls off, Andrew said, and wearily rubbed the back of his neck with a towel. After a few days of listening to it, Craig had finally figured out that the violence and lechery, the ceaseless talk of cutting and pumping and stomping, were just polite conventions in the conversation at the Olympic. He hardly noticed it anymore. As usual, Santo put on Batman costume for his arm work, which was mostly seated and required all his concentration. The mask made him inapproachable. No one spoke to him while he had it on, as he sat curling or pressing from his triceps, looking strange and mythic and capable of calm, superhuman deeds. Whoever happened to be in the studio then laid down their iron and watched quietly as the great arms expanded and contracted, stretched and bulged under the cape and the mask. And the masked, square-jawed face stared impassively back at them. The workout ended about 8 o'clock and Thor came out of his office to direct Santo's poses. They had grown steadily more massive since the first time Craig had watched. It was impossible now to imagine a larger arm, a broader back, or a deeper chest, yet all Santo's proportions were still graceful. Craig could squint his eyes at the poses, and Santo would become a Renaissance goblet or an hourglass, some kind of wrought, inhumanely balanced shape. The biggest problem, Thor told him now, was skin tone. He told Santo to get less sun on his back and start using moisturizing cream. At 9 o'clock, they met Mary Tate at Mayoto's. Over dinner, Santo mentioned the Mr. Gulf Coast contest that was being held that weekend in Mobile, and asked if Craig and Mary Tate wanted to go down for it. The contest was sponsored by Thor's Mobile Club. Thor was going down to present the awards, and he, Santo, was on the panel of judges. Mary Tate was willing, and Craig, who had never seen a body contest, said sure, they would go. They would leave Saturday morning, said Santo, and come back that night after the contest. They could go down in Thor's air-conditioned Continental. Stuart will probably take it, he said. He's big time now, but he likes to win these little ones. He shook his head. He's a good boy, Stuart, but he has practically no sense of style. Is that the Mr. Mississippi? Yeah, is that Mr. Mississippi, the guy you thought I worked for? The same. I'm still not sure you don't. Joe won the Gulf Coast 3 years in a row, Mary Tate told Craig. So Stuart started raising hell about him working for Thor and it being Thor's contest and all. Santo's busy hands were breaking little pieces off a fortune cookie and powdering them between his fingers onto his butter plate. It's not a bad little contest. They've got a new auditorium and they pull a good crowd. They get a few good guys too. A lot of good backs down in that part of the country and a lot of tattoos. There used to be a guy 3 or 4 years ago named Malloy. You remember me telling you about Malloy, Mary? Mary Tate shuddered, remembering, and Santo laughed. This crazy mother used to enter that contest every year and he had an ear on his chest. Had it grafted on there or something. I mean, it was growing there. Franklin says he took it off some guy down in Pascagoula. Santo had scooped the fortune cookie dust into a little brown mountain on the plate. He had a hell of a build, but he never won because of that ear. And he wouldn't take it off, so finally he just quit competing. Old Malloy, he was a hell of a nice guy. Santo put some money on his check and stood up, mountainous, still smiling about Malloy. You want to ride? Craig asked him. Nope. It's a nice night. I think I'll walk. Besides, you all look tired. You ought to get some more sleep, he said and winked at Mary Tate. There was a gusty wind outside that scattered paper around his legs and stung his eyes with grit as Santo walked into it down 19th Street out of town. At First Avenue, he crossed over to 20th and followed it south towards 5 Points, 3 miles away. On the way, he waved through the streaked window of Young's shoe store at Henry, black proprietor who had gotten rich selling whiskey and beer on Sunday. Tilted against the wall in a straight chair, Henry grinned a sleepy bootlegger's grin and waved back. He spoke to Phil, who sold tamales in front of the Parliament House, and then to the one-legged parking lot attendant who called himself Jeb Stewart. It was a beautiful night on the street. The wind was gusty and excited as laughter. It whirled scraps and bits of things like confetti above the sidewalk, and they glittered in the creamy lights of passing cars. There were a lot of lights on 20th Street at night, but Santo's favorites were high and distant. To the northeast, repeating the profile of the skyline, was the cherry glow from the steel mill in Woodlawn that made him think, though he had never seen them, of the northern lights. The other light was 4 or 5 miles to the south, on top of Red Mountain, in the outflung hand of Vulcan, the Iron Man, the mythical blacksmith and symbol of the city. The statue stuck up 180 feet, stark and narrow as a finger from the bare mountain, and showed the whole valley below a colored torch. Red if somebody in Birmingham had killed somebody else that day. Green if everyone had gotten through another day without being shot or stabbed or run over. The torch was usually red, but tonight it was green, a healthy tropical color that Santo preferred to the red. He jogged the last uphill blocks to his apartment, feeling wonderful, like another born-up part of the warm, breezy night. It was 11:30. He made another milkshake, drank it in bed as he thumbed through a New Yorker, a Strength and Health, and an American Horseman. He turned off his light before 12 and fell asleep, as he always did, immediately. So Sampo, stay hungry. Love this book. If you get a chance to read it, you'll really enjoy it.